A person cannot hide their true nature forever. No matter how hard they try to smile, adjust their voice, or wear the mask of politeness, there will come a moment, just a fleeting second, when everything falls apart. And if you are aware enough, still enough to observe, you will see it. No words needed, just presence. I remember that evening vividly, in a room filled with polite laughter and the warm lights of a successful party. Everyone was acting in the same play, enthusiastic, charming, confident, but behind that brightness, I felt the small pulses of pretense, someone nodding too often, someone laughing longer than necessary, someone glancing at their watch, though only a few minutes had passed. There, among the laughter and wine, I saw something chillingly clear. Everyone was trying to read everyone else. When we walk into a room, whether we realize it or not, every eye immediately scans us, measuring tone, analyzing gestures, decoding every silence. They do this out of instinct, out of fear, desire to be liked, or simply to know whether we can offer them what they seek. But there are people who do not do it unconsciously. They observe with intent, as if every human being were a puzzle to solve, every expression a pathway to power. Machiavelli was one of them. He believed power did not come from speaking more, but from seeing deeper, faster, sharper. To control someone, you must first understand them. To protect yourself, you must predict them. And to rule, you must read them before they realize they are being read. People say, don't judge a book by its cover. But Machiavelli saw it differently. He believed everything is the cover, a series of masks layered over one another. A smile can be an apology, a handshake can be a threat, and a compliment can be a test to see if you are easy to manipulate. So instead of believing what people show, he learned to look between the lines, where truth hides in the small cracks of behavior. I used to think reading people was a skill for the suspicious, those who never felt safe. But then I realized, everyone reads others. Not everyone knows they're doing it. A mother sees her son come home late and reads the lie in his eyes. A lover feels the distance in a short message. A leader knows when a subordinate is flattering them. Everyone does it, only with different levels of subtlety. Machiavelli simply turned instinct into art. He didn't guess, didn't rely on feelings. He observed, experimented, and distilled it into clear strategies. 14 principles for seeing through human nature. These principles are not for the faint of heart. They demand coldness, detachment from emotion, to see humans as patterns of behavior rather than souls. But precisely for that reason, they are frighteningly effective. His first rule sounds simple. Watch how they treat those they believe are unimportant. Not you, not their boss, but the waiter, the cleaner, the one they have nothing to gain from. There, where they think no one is watching, their true nature appears. A person can say 1,000 kind words to you, but if they snap their fingers at a waiter, you already know how they will treat you once your value fades. Human nature does not reveal itself when people try to impress, but when they believe they no longer have to try. I once worked with a man like that. When talking to clients, he was the embodiment of charm, warm voice, focused eyes, every gesture perfectly measured. But the moment we stepped out of the meeting room, he threw his coffee at the receptionist because she stupidly spilled a few drops on the table. That day, I understood that true strength is not in how one speaks to the powerful, but in how one looks at the powerless. And from that moment, I began to observe, as Machiavelli once did, not at what people want me to see, but at what they think I cannot see. The world outside is full of false signals, but no one can hide their true energy for long. Under the light, anyone can shine. But in silence, in waiting, in those awkward minutes when there is no praise or attention, they return to who they truly are. Machiavelli once said, "Silence is not absence, it's pressure. Silence is not emptiness, it is tension." Under that pressure, people talk more than they should. They try to fill the air. They reveal what they never intended to share. Have you ever tried saying nothing in a conversation? Just sit still, look into the other person's eyes, smile softly, and stay silent. You'll notice something strange. Most people cannot bear the quiet. They begin to explain more, justify, or brag, not because they want to share, but because they fear being seen. And in that fear, they take off their armor themselves. Machiavelli understood that reading people is not about dissecting every word, but about standing outside the game. The The true observer does not need to interfere. They only need patience to see who speaks, who stays silent, and who tries to make them react. So if there is one rule to begin with, it is this: slow down. Watch how someone reacts when you don't praise them, when you don't seem impressed, when you don't reveal what you think. In that space of uncertainty, they will show everything. When I stepped out of that dim room that night, I realized something no one says aloud. Every encounter is a small experiment. Everyone is trying to read everyone else, to guess who is weak, who is strong, who is hiding something. But only those who are truly silent, truly awake, can see the game from above. And perhaps, in a world where everyone tries to prove something, the one who observes without judgment is the one who truly holds power, because he doesn't need to win against anyone. He only needs to know who wears the mask and who still remains themselves. There is one thing Machiavelli always believed with certainty. Human nature does not reveal itself through words, but through how people treat what they consider small or insignificant. A glance, a fleeting reaction, the way they bow their head or refuse to before someone lower in status, all are tiny cracks that expose their true self. I have seen it hundreds of times in luxurious rooms and in tiny coffee shops where people still perform, but only for those they think are worth it. Imagine you are sitting in a restaurant. The man beside you speaks with admirable politeness, gentle voice, friendly eyes. But when the waiter brings the wrong dish, he suddenly changes. His tone drops, cold, with a hint of contempt in every word. That is when the mask falls, even if only for a few seconds. For Machiavelli, those moments were more valuable than any speech about morality. Because when people feel safe enough to be themselves, they will unconsciously reveal how they will treat you when you are no longer useful. I began to learn how to observe those unintentional moments. When someone opens a door, do they hold it for the next person? When they smile, do their eyes move in harmony with their lips? When they compliment you, is there a brief hesitation or a trace of envy hidden deep in their pupils? Those tiny details, once truly seen, will tell you far more than any words they speak. But reading people is not only about observing actions, it is also about watching how they endure silence. Silence, to Machiavelli, was a subtle form of torture. People hate it because in silence, they are forced to face themselves, with no place to hide behind sound, speech, or noise. When you stop talking, when you refuse to fill the space, they begin to feel afraid. And to escape that fear, they start talking more, faster, more carelessly. I tried that once. During a meeting, I paused mid-conversation, simply looked at the other person, and let the silence spread. 3 seconds in, he smiled. 5 seconds, he cleared his throat. 10 seconds, he began to justify something no one had accused him of. In 15 seconds, I said nothing, yet I already knew what he was hiding. Silence, it turns out, can be louder than any question. There are people who use noise to hide their emptiness. They talk a lot, share a lot, laugh loudly, as if afraid that the moment they stop, the world will see their fragility. When you meet someone like that, do not react too quickly. Just keep the calm within you. Watch as they expose themselves. Machiavelli once taught, speak less than they do, and you will hear more than you expect. But it is not only silence that makes masks fall. One of his most ruthless tactics was give them nothing. No praise, no recognition, no reaction. When you deny people what they crave, you force them to face themselves, with nowhere left to anchor their sense of worth. And then, you will see, those who are warm only when noticed will grow cold. Those who are used to compliments will start to lose balance. And those who possess true strength will keep breathing steadily, unchanged, even without validation. I once tried this with a colleague, a man who believed everyone liked him. For a week, I stayed neutral, no agreement, no objection, only listening. In 7 days, he grew anxious, asked if something was wrong, and finally confessed a list of insecurities. I didn't have to ask. He opened his own mind simply because he couldn't endure the emptiness of indifference. Machiavelli was right. When you give someone nothing, you will see what they truly need. The interesting thing is that weak people often mistake silence for contempt. They see your lack of reaction as an insult. But the strong, the truly strong, understand that silence is a test. They are not afraid of the quiet. because they do not need validation to know their worth. And that is what makes them formidable. To Machiavelli, reading people was never about judgment, but about awareness. When you know who is real and who is performing, you no longer get pulled into their game. You simply observe, like someone standing behind the stage curtain, watching every string pulled, every rehearsed move. But there is a price. The more clearly you see people, the farther you feel from them. Every conversation begins to feel like an experiment. Every smile carries a question. Every handshake becomes a measure of power. And sometimes, in that sharp awareness, you just wish you could trust someone without analyzing them. Machiavelli did not write these principles to make people better. He wrote them to help people survive within the layers of deception that power creates. In a world where every word has an intention, every action a strategy, those who cannot read others will always be the ones being read. I thought about that as I looked back at myself. How many times have I tried to impress, to be acknowledged, to be right? How many times have I feared silence so much that I spoke words I did not need to say? Perhaps we are all being read without even knowing it. But in the moment you realize that, a small door opens where you can choose to keep performing or to begin observing. Because in this world, the silent are not weak. They are the ones who have learned to hear the noise of others without letting it distract them. When night falls, I remember that room from the other evening. The faces, the laughter, the glances, everything seemed peaceful. But I knew everyone in that room was reading, measuring, testing. And at the center of that game, there was only one true rule: whoever sees deeper holds the power. Perhaps that is what makes humanity both terrifying and tragic. We do not only want to be understood, we want to understand first. We do not only want to be loved, we want to know who will betray us. And in that invisible chase, the one who stays silent is often the one who wins in the end. There are people who step into a conversation as if they have rehearsed for hours. Every word is chosen carefully, every smile measured, every tilt of the head, every sigh deliberate. They don't communicate, they perform. You can feel that perfection. So smooth, it feels unreal. So charming, it makes you forget you are being guided. Machiavelli called these people living scripts. And he understood that if you want to read them, there is only one thing you must do: break the script. No one likes to be interrupted during their own performance. When you stay silent at the wrong moment, when you don't respond to a compliment, when you suddenly change the topic, you create a pause, like a small crack in a mirror. In that moment, the actor cannot stay in character, and you see who they truly are. Machiavelli believed that the most perfect people are often the most fragile, because they depend on being seen as the image they have built. Just one offbeat note, and the mask begins to split. I once saw a man like that, a politician who controlled every word, every gesture, every tone. He told a joke during a meeting. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I only gave a faint smile and said nothing. His smile faded for an instant. His eyes flickered, and in that brief second, anger surfaced. In that moment, I knew his charm was only a shell. People are not afraid of being criticized. They are afraid of not being acknowledged. When you take away their control, when you stay silent, when you refuse to follow the rhythm they set, you throw them off balance. And in that imbalance, the real self steps out, raw and exposed. Machiavelli called it the slipping of the mask, the moment when a person unconsciously reveals their primal nature. The weak show fear, the proud show anger, the genuine show calm. But he did not stop there. He wanted to test loyalty, not through grand promises, but through small losses. Refuse a request. Stay silent when they expect an answer. Deny a privilege they take for granted. When you do that, you do not belittle them. You simply remove the mirror they rely on to see themselves, and then they reveal who they are. The honest still respect you. The opportunist begins to pull away, and the dangerous one tries to make you feel guilty. I remember once, a close friend asked me for a small favor. I said no, gently, without explanation. She smiled and said it was fine, but days later, she stopped reaching out. Then I heard her telling others that I had changed, that I had become cold. Machiavelli was right. True loyalty is not measured by what people do when they receive, but by how they react when denied. We never truly know who is loyal until they feel hurt. From that, I learned one thing. Those who say, "I'm always here for you," can only be tested when you are no longer useful. Refuse them once, and you will see the truth without a single word. There is another way to see through people. Let them talk, and watch what they focus on. Machiavelli believed words can lie, but attention cannot. When someone speaks, notice where their eyes settle. On power, on their phone, on their own reflection. Focus reveals what they worship. The one who keeps looking around while you speak is not busy. They simply see you as temporary. The one who keeps steady eye contact without needing to prove anything is often the hardest to bend. Reading people, therefore, does not require academic analysis. It is a quiet art. You don't need to take notes or overthink. You just need to feel the silence between the words. Humans can lie, but they cannot stop themselves from revealing through the smallest things: a shift in breathing, a flicker in the eyes, a faint tightening of the hand. Once I tried one of Machiavelli's tactics, pretending to be weak. I told a coworker that I often felt anxious about being judged. It was a harmless lie, just to see how he would react. A few weeks later, during a meeting, he brought it up, half-jokingly, in front of everyone. No malice, but enough for me to know, if I had told him the truth, he would have used it against me. From then on, I needed no further test. A fake weakness had revealed a real nature. Machiavelli believed that how someone handles your weakness tells you what they would do if they had power over you. The one who exploits it is a manipulator. The one who ignores it is cautious. The one who shares their own weakness is seeking connection. A single sentence can categorize the world. I think sometimes we fear being hurt so much that we try to read others before they can wound us. But that very act makes us colder. When you look at everyone through suspicion, you build an invisible wall around yourself. Machiavelli didn't speak of trust. He spoke of survival. But between survival and loneliness, the line is thinner than we think. Maybe as you listen to this, you wonder, am I being read by someone? Is someone testing me without me knowing? The answer is yes, always. But perhaps instead of fearing it, we should start observing ourselves. When someone stays silent in front of you, do you feel uneasy? When someone refuses you, do you lose your calm? When someone withholds recognition, do you try to win it back? Those reactions are the map to the parts of ourselves still unhealed. So, if there is one thing you take away from this, let it be this. Don't just learn to read others. Pay attention to how you are being read. And if these words touch something in you, if you have ever seen yourself in the silence, in rejection, or in the restless need to fill a quiet space, leave a small trace, a thought, a few words, because sometimes speaking is the only way to understand what we have been hiding. In the end, reading people is not a game of power. It is a mirror. Every time we recognize someone's act, it is because we have once performed the same. And only when we dare to face that part of ourselves can we truly understand what it means to see through others, not to control them, but to stop being deceived by our own reflection. Time is the most honest test of every relationship. You don't need to force anyone to reveal what they think. You only need to make them wait. When Machiavelli wanted to read a person, he didn't ask, didn't interrogate, he delayed. A message answered late. A promise stretched out. A meeting left undefined. In that waiting space, patience evaporates like dew under sunlight. The one with self-respect will understand. The one with emotional balance will wait. But the arrogant one will get angry, blame you, or try to make you feel guilty. I once tried that not to manipulate, but to see who truly valued me and who only valued my reaction to them. When I replied late to a message, one close friend smiled and said, "I know you're busy. Talk when you can." Another sent 3 messages, then 4, then finally wrote, "If you don't care anymore, just say so." I wasn't angry. I just saw clearly the distance between loving someone and needing them to make you feel loved is very thin. Patience, according to Machiavelli, is not a virtue, but a test of power. The impatient always reveal their weakness because they need attention like air to breathe. They cannot stand being in a position they cannot control, and that is when their true nature appears. But time isn't the only thing that exposes people. He also said, if you want to know what someone desires, watch who they imitate. Humans are creatures of imitation. From tone of voice, posture, even seemingly spontaneous words, all are reflections of some ideal in their mind. When you see someone constantly using the phrases of the famous or mimicking the manner of the powerful, They are revealing what they crave most: power, admiration, or virtue. I once worked with a man who often spoke of integrity as if it were a slogan. He said he despised deceit, despised office politics. But I noticed during meetings, his eyes always turned toward the director, as if every word he spoke existed only to be heard, to be acknowledged. He didn't hate power. He only hated not having it. Machiavelli once wrote, "No one envies what they do not desire. Envy appears only when we see the version of ourselves we have not yet become." And that was his 10th tactic. Awaken envy, then watch their face in that fleeting moment. You don't need to boast. Just mention something small, a compliment someone gave you, an opportunity you just received. If their smile tightens, if their eyes shift, if they change the subject, or subtly belittle your story, you've seen what they didn't want anyone to see. Envy never shouts. It glints briefly like the edge of a hidden blade. And once you see it, you never forget it. Once, I told a friend that I'd just been invited to collaborate on a new project. He smiled and said, "That's great," but then added, "Actually, everyone's getting invited to those kinds of things lately." An innocent comment on the surface, but there was a small crack in it. His smile stayed, but his eyes didn't. In that moment, I saw what Machiavelli saw. Behind envy lies fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of not being enough. And that fear is what makes people easiest to control. The world is full of people who declare what they hate. They say they hate pretenders, they hate greed, they hate weakness. But Machiavelli warned, what people hate most is often a reflection of themselves. The one who hates deceit is often the most skilled liar. The one who mocks weakness is often the one who cannot bear to feel hurt. Humans always judge the parts of themselves they cannot accept. Every "I hate" is a confession disguised as virtue. I once asked a man, "What do you hate most in others?" He answered instantly, "People with no ambition." It sounded harmless, but it held a whole psychological map. He didn't hate laziness. He feared that one day he might no longer be seen as driven. In that answer, Machiavelli would have heard the echo of the ego. And then there are the eyes, the one thing that cannot be hidden. The eyes are the window to the soul, people say. But Machiavelli believed they are the escape route for suppressed emotions. When you speak of money, reputation, or shame, and the person across from you suddenly looks away, it isn't just discomfort, it's survival. They are afraid of being seen. A quick blink, a brief glance, that's all it takes to know what they wish to hide. Once, I asked a man who had always been confident, "Are you afraid of failure?" He laughed. "Who isn't? But I'm used to it." Yet when I mentioned a specific failure from his past, his eyes dropped to the table. Then he changed the subject. That avoidance was louder than any denial. When someone lowers their eyes, it's not always respect. It's often an attempt to flee from themselves. From these details, Machiavelli drew an intricate map of human psychology, not just to understand, but to predict. He knew, if you see someone afraid of being forgotten, make them wait. If they crave praise, withdraw it. If they hide envy, let them think you don't notice. When people are forced to face their own fear, they reveal every weakness they have. But sometimes, I wonder, does seeing too much make us lose something? When you look into someone's eyes and see their fear, can you still love them the same way? When you know who envies, who pretends, who performs, can your compassion remain intact? Machiavelli may have held the key to power, but he also opened the door to loneliness. Because once you see people clearly, you also see your own solitude. Maybe true power doesn't come from reading others, but from knowing when to stop, when to see without judging, when to understand without losing your heart. There were two final tactics Machiavelli kept for himself, two of his sharpest blades, no longer meant to read others, but to make them remove their own armor and reveal their true nature. He called them the principle of reflection and the principle of disarming through respect. Two approaches that seemed opposite, one a mirror that made people see themselves, the other an embrace that made them feel safe. Yet both led to the same place where they forgot they were being observed. Machiavelli realized that most people walk through life wearing a mask. They perform kindness, confidence, even pain, all to control how others see them. But if you want to see through them, become their mirror. No need to act, just respond subtly. Mirror their tone, their posture, the rhythm of their voice. Not enough to make your intention visible, but enough to create familiarity. People always soften in front of what feels like themselves. When they see their own reflection in you, their defenses begin to melt. But time isn't the only thing that exposes people. He also said, if you want to know what someone desires, watch who they imitate. Humans are creatures of imitation. From tone of voice, posture, even seemingly spontaneous words, all are reflections of some ideal in their mind. When you see someone constantly using the phrases of the famous or mimicking the manner of the powerful, they are revealing what they crave most: power, admiration, or virtue. Machiavelli once wrote, when a man sees himself in you, he forgets that you are looking. But reflection is more than a technique. It is a psychological game. When you reflect confidence, the manipulator grows uneasy because they lose control. When you reflect insecurity, they will try to rise above it, unknowingly, exposing their real weakness. And when you reflect calm, they will try to provoke you because your stillness unsettles them. Machiavelli understood that the more accurately someone is reflected, the more their essence is revealed. Resistance itself is proof of performance. Yet he also knew that some people cannot be mirrored. They walk into every interaction armed, suspicious, guarded, cautious. For them, Machiavelli used another method: respect before observation. He said that people are always waiting to be judged. They carry justifications in their pockets, ready-made lines, to protect the image they want to keep. But when you do not attack, when instead you praise, acknowledge, or respect them, they lose balance. Respect disarms. And in that small moment of relief, you can ask the one question they would never normally answer. Imagine saying to someone, "You seem very certain about your decisions." As they relax, feeling seen, you add softly, "Do you ever worry that certainty is just a way to hide the fear of not being trusted?" No accusation, no threat, just a subtle cut. They will pause, then smile, then answer with something half serious, half playful. But in that instant, you will see what they never meant to reveal. I once tried this in a short meeting. The man in front of me spoke fast, clipped, and held a closed posture. I started speaking at the same pace, the same tone, then gradually slowed down when I wanted him to relax. Within minutes, his shoulders dropped, his eyes softened, and he began sharing things I never thought he would. Not because I asked skillfully, but because he believed he was speaking to a part of himself. Then she told me about the years she was underestimated, about the fear that made her pretend to be stronger than she felt. I wasn't a psychologist, only someone who knew when to soften my voice. Respect opened the door. A gentle question lifted the mask. Machiavelli knew that admiration is the golden key to every door. When you make someone feel understood, they give you everything. When you make them feel admired, they willingly hand you even what they've hidden. Because people are most honest when they believe they are loved. I once heard someone say, when you make others feel safe, they give you the right to see their soul. Perhaps Machiavelli understood this long before anyone else. He didn't need to force or threaten. He simply made others believe he was their ally, that he respected them, that he meant no harm. And once trust was planted, he asked only one question, the kind that made masks fall without leaving a wound. But, like every art, this, too, carries a shadow. Because if you can make someone trust you enough to reveal themselves, you also hold the greatest power of all the power to shape how they see themselves. And that power, if not handled carefully, turns the observer into the manipulator. I once used this during an interview. Across from me sat a strong, confident woman, her voice firm and steady. I praised her leadership, the way she commanded attention. She smiled and said, "I've learned that over time." I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "And when no one listens, how do you keep your voice from trembling?" Her eyes shifted. She didn't answer right away. When you become the mirror, you see others. When you use respect to open hearts, you see their truth. But the most frightening thing is not what you see in them. It's when you start seeing, in them, the reflection of your own darkness. Because people mirror one another, like endless reflections down a corridor. And while you try to read others, they may already be reading you, seeing the cracks you haven't managed to hide. Power, in this game, is always mutual. There is a fragile line between understanding people and controlling them. Most believe they are observing, yet in truth, they are manipulating without realizing it. Machiavelli never denied this. He simply accepted it as a natural truth of power. To understand someone means you can predict their actions, and if you can predict them, you can lead them. From there, reading people stops being a defensive art and becomes a silent form of attack, he once said. To understand a person's weakness is to hold the map to their mind. When you know someone fears abandonment, all you have to do is create distance. When they crave praise, stay silent. When they need control, let them believe they are controlling you. People are not driven by reason, but by fear and satisfaction. And if you touch those points, they will follow you believing it was their choice all along. I once saw this in a leader. He never gave direct orders. He simply said things that made people want to act for him. To the one who sought recognition, he gave praise. To the one who needed trust, he asked for help. To the one afraid of being replaced, he offered a sense of importance. He never forced anyone. He let them build their own cages out of their desires. And when they realized it, they had already done exactly what he needed. Machiavelli called this invisible influence. In his world, reading people went beyond observation. It became a way of shaping the frame through which others acted. Once you understand their instinctive reactions, you can design the situation to draw out what you want to see. You don't need to ask, you only need to arrange. Like a chess player, you don't move every piece. You just know where the next move will come from. I remember reading about a negotiation where Machiavelli tried this approach. He didn't discuss terms or prices. He simply told a story about a general who lost a battle because he lost his temper. When the man across from him tried to appear calm, Machiavelli knew he had won. Because when you make someone prove something, they act exactly as you predict. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the ability to read people is a double-edged blade. When you understand too much, you begin to play with that understanding. You create reactions, test limits, adjust your tone, your eyes, your silence, just to see how others respond. At first, you call it psychological insight, but over time, it becomes a subtle form of control, a way to feed your ego under the mask of awareness. When you become the mirror, you see others. When you use respect to open hearts, you see their truth. But the most frightening thing is not what you see in them, it's when you start seeing in them the reflection of your own darkness. Because people mirror one another, like endless reflections down a corridor, Machiavelli was never afraid of this. He saw power as a natural flow. Whoever understood human nature best would have the right to direct that flow. But to me, the danger lies elsewhere. The better you are at controlling others, the further you drift from your own emotions. You begin to see people as pieces on a board, and you forget that they too are looking at you with their own fears, hopes, and wounds. Machiavelli once warned himself about this. He said, "When we look too deeply into people, we see the animal within them. And if we are not careful, it awakens the animal within us." Power not only strips others of their masks, it strips us of our own. And if you don't know when to stop, you become the manipulator of your own humanity. I remember one evening after everyone had left, I sat alone in the empty meeting room. The words, the looks, the gestures from the day replayed in my head like a slow-motion film. I could analyze every person, every motive, but in that moment, I felt hollow. Something was missing in knowing too much. Because when you can read everyone, you stop being surprised, and without surprise, you stop feeling alive. I began to understand that Machiavelli didn't just teach observation, he taught the cost of clarity. When you can see through others, you also see the frightening things inside yourself, the hunger for power, the fear of pain, the desire to control the small world around you. That is the moment when the art of reading people turns into psychological warfare. No longer understanding, but steering. No longer feeling, but predicting. And in that game, the one who can still hold on to compassion is the only one who remains free. Machiavelli called this level the strategy of influence. He taught that persuasion needs no words. You only need to mirror another person's desire, then quietly align it with your own. To the ambitious, praise their ambition. To the lonely, make them feel safe. When people feel understood, they will follow you, but they will never realize where you are leading them. That kind of power is cold, thin, and sharp as steel. It doesn't need violence or threats. It only needs understanding. And sometimes, understanding alone is enough to control. Yet there is one truth Machiavelli rarely mentioned. Those who read people best are often the loneliest. Because no one wants to stand beside someone who can see right through them. When you see too much, you lose the ability to trust. And when you lose the ability to trust, only one thing remains: control. And control, no matter how refined, is still just another form of fear. When you look at people long enough, eventually, you begin to see yourself, not the polished version you show the world, but the deeper one, where fear, pride, and the hunger for power hide beneath calm appearances. Machiavelli called this the shadow of intellect, the moment when the keenest observer realizes that the greatest deception is not being fooled by others, but by one's own emotions. He once wrote, "When the curtain falls, the only one still standing is not the victor, but the one who learned to disappear at the right moment." At its deepest level, reading people is no longer a game of intellect, but a test of morality. Because once you can see every motive, you can also bend it. And the question is no longer, how do I know? But how do I remain kind even after knowing? I once thought power came from control, understanding others, predicting their actions, guiding them without leaving a trace. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became that such understanding frees no one. It only turns you into the one standing above it all, alone. While everyone else becomes intricate puppets on invisible strings. You know how to make them smile, how to make them open up, how to make them follow. But one day, you realize no one truly looks back at you anymore. They only see their reflection in your eyes. Once, I told a friend that I'd just been invited to collaborate on a new project. He smiled and said, "That's great," but then added, "Actually, everyone's getting invited to those kinds of things lately." An innocent comment on the surface, but there was a small crack in it. His smile stayed, but his eyes didn't. In that moment, I saw what Machiavelli saw. Behind envy lies fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of not being enough. And that fear is what makes people easiest to control. Machiavelli once warned that those who can read everyone are the most tempted to believe they stand above them. But that's when they lose what makes them human: empathy. When you know someone is pretending, you stop believing them. When you see a fragile soul trembling, you no longer feel compassion. You only study their reaction. Slowly, the heart becomes a magnifying glass, clear, but cold. I have met people like that. They walk into a room and instantly know who flatters, who envies, who fears. They never say a word too many. They always know how to make others feel small, then grateful for being spared. They are brilliant, yet in their eyes lies an emptiness. The emptiness of someone no longer trusted by those they understand too well. And one night, I looked back at all the faces I had ever read. I realized each of them reflected a part of me. The pride of the powerful, the fear of the forgotten, the envy of the defeated. I hadn't just read them. I had been reading myself through them. Every glance, every conversation, was just another mirror, showing the same soul trying to understand itself. And I think perhaps that was Machiavelli's final lesson, the one he never wrote down. When you read deep enough, you understand that no one truly deserves to be exposed. We are all just human, trying to hide the most vulnerable part of ourselves. All the cunning tactics, the strategies of power, are nothing more than desperate attempts to feel safe. Once you understand that, you no longer want to manipulate. You want to forgive. You want to step out of the game, not because you lost, but because you no longer wish to win. Because winning means you must keep reading, keep doubting, keep standing outside life without ever living it. Someone once asked me, if you could read everyone, would you be happier? I was about to say yes, but I stayed silent. Because the truth is no. When you know too much, you lose the ability to feel the simplest thing: unconditional trust. And maybe happiness is not in understanding others, but in accepting that you never truly will and choosing to love them anyway. Machiavelli saw this before he left the game of power. He didn't lose to anyone. He simply disappeared. No will, no warning. Only a single line in his final manuscript, never officially published. The one who sees through everyone must one day choose to stop looking. When you can see through everything, you must learn to close your eyes, not out of fear, but out of the desire to live. I don't know if I've learned that yet. But tonight, looking into the mirror, I see someone who has walked through hundreds of eyes, thousands of faces, and finally found only himself. No longer needing to read, no longer needing to predict. Just silent, looking straight into his own eyes, and smiling at the one truth Machiavelli may have smiled at before he vanished. That true power does not lie in seeing through others, but in seeing them and still choosing to keep your humanity. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.